In the frozen silence of Montana's mountains, a retired Navy SEAL knelt beside his dying dog, the same German Shepherd that once dragged him out of a battlefield fire 12 years ago. Snow howled outside the cabin, the Christmas lights long since burned out. With shaking hands, he whispered, "I'm sorry, buddy. I failed you." But when the vet reached for the syringe, the old dog moved, and what happened next would turn one man's guilt into the miracle of a lifetime. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind rolled down from the Gallatin Range like a living thing, whispering through the pine needles and scattering powdery snow across the frozen valley. Montana's mountains lay silent under a white December sky, the air sharp as glass. Inside a small cedar cabin near the tree line, a single ember glowed in the hearth, the only sign that someone still lived there. Jack Mercer sat near the fire, elbows on his knees, the flicker of flame washing his lined face in gold and shadow. He was 41, with sun-weathered skin and a build that still hinted at the Navy SEAL he used to be. Broad shoulders, disciplined posture, but a kind of stillness that didn't belong to soldiers anymore. His short brown hair had silver streaks at the temples, and faint scars traced the right side of his neck, reminders of a blast 12 years ago in Kandahar. His blue eyes, once steady and decisive, now carried that vacant distance soldiers bring home when the war keeps playing behind their eyelids. He wasn't broken, not completely. Just paused, caught between memory and survival. At his feet lay Bolt, a 12-year-old German Shepherd with a black and tan coat dulled by age. Bolt had been Jack's partner in the service, a K-9 trained for explosives and rescue missions. Even now, the dog's ears still twitched at faint sounds, but his breath came slower, deeper, and sometimes caught halfway, like an old engine misfiring. Bolt wasn't just a pet. He was the last piece of Jack's purpose, the only soul who'd stayed when the world moved on. Together, they had survived war, silence, and 13 Montana winters. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Outside, snow kept falling, thick, relentless, erasing every trail and marking a clean page the way winter always did here. Jack reached for the photograph on the mantel. A picture of 6 young men in desert fatigues standing beside a German Shepherd barely 2 years old. They all smiled then, faces dusted in sand, unaware how many of them wouldn't make it home. Jack's thumb brushed over one face, Lieutenant Mark Halpern, his commanding officer, the man who'd saved his life by pushing him clear of that explosion. Mark hadn't survived the blast. Bolt had pulled Jack out of the wreckage instead, dragging him 50 feet through burning debris with half his leg torn open. That was the day Jack decided he didn't believe in luck, only debt. He set the photo down, the frame clinking against the wood. Bolt shifted beside him, letting out a low sigh, head resting on his paws. The firelight flickered over his muzzle, once sharp and dark, now gray and frosted like the snow outside. Jack bent forward and scratched behind the old dog's ear. "Still on watch, huh?" he murmured. "You can stand down someday, old boy." Bolt blinked slowly, tail thumping once against the rug as if to say not yet. The cabin smelled of pine resin, smoke, and the faint trace of motor oil that clung to everything Jack owned. He had been working earlier that day in the detached garage, his ritual of maintenance and control. The generator, his old blue Ford pickup, the rifle he hadn't fired in years. Everything had to be checked, cleaned, and put in order. It was the only way to keep the chaos quiet. He rose, joints stiff, and pulled on his heavy flannel jacket. The night was getting colder, the fire sinking low. "Stay here, pal," he said, stepping into his boots. Bolt's ears flicked, but he didn't move. Outside, the wind bit hard, filling the air with tiny shards of snow. The garage door creaked as Jack shoved it open. Inside, fluorescent light flickered once, then steadied, revealing tools neatly arranged on the wall, a half-open toolbox and the silent bulk of the generator in the corner. He crouched beside it, the breath from his mouth turning to vapor. A faint smell caught his attention. Sweet. Chemical. Jack frowned. A thin, steady drip fell from a cracked hose onto the concrete, forming a small puddle of bright green liquid beneath the machine. "Damn," he muttered, reaching for a rag. "Coolant line again." He tightened the clamp, wiped the spill, and tossed the rag aside. The antifreeze shimmered faintly under the light, a strange beauty in its poison. He'd planned to replace the hose after Christmas, but now he'd have to do it sooner. Still, the line looked secure enough for tonight. Jack straightened, rubbed his hands together to shake off the chill, and shut down the light. The garage plunged into darkness except for the snowlight slipping through the window slats, a cold, blue-white glow. Behind him, faint paw steps clicked on the concrete. "Bolt?" he called softly. The old dog had followed him out, nose twitching as he sniffed along the floor. Jack smiled faintly. "Go on, get back inside. Too cold out here." Bolt hesitated, his head tilted toward the puddle. The scent, faintly sweet, like syrup, drew him closer. Jack didn't notice. He was already closing the toolbox, lost in thought. When he turned around, Bolt was licking at the floor. "Hey! No! Stop that!" Jack snapped, voice sharp. The dog flinched and backed off, licking his muzzle. Jack grabbed an old towel, wiped the area again until the concrete was dry. "Stupid stuff," he muttered, angry more at himself than the dog. "You'll drink anything, won't you?" Bolt wagged his tail once, oblivious. Jack exhaled, tension fading, and led him back toward the cabin. Inside, the fire had nearly died. Jack threw on another log, sparks leaping into the chimney. The warmth returned slowly, wrapping the room in its orange pulse. Bolt settled by the hearth, curling up tight. Jack poured himself a measure of whiskey, the cheap kind that burned just enough to keep memories quiet. He lifted the glass toward the photograph on the mantel. "To the ones who didn't make it," he said softly, "and to the one who did." He drank, the firelight flickering across his eyes. The world outside roared with wind and snow, but the cabin was still. Bolt shifted again, letting out a soft whine. Jack turned, concern knitting his brow. "What's wrong, buddy?" The dog was restless, licking his lips. Jack reached down, rubbed his neck. "You all right? Ate something weird?" Bolt's tail twitched once more. Then he rested his head back down. His breathing evened out. Jack waited a moment longer, then sighed, tossing another log into the flames. "Probably nothing," he muttered. "Too much cold, that's all." He leaned back in his chair, boots crossed, and watched the snow blur against the window pane. The night deepened, the storm's howl softening into rhythm, almost like waves against a distant shore. For the first time that day, Jack felt himself drifting, his thoughts slipping between the crackle of the fire and the ghost of the sea. He almost didn't notice Bolt's breathing growing heavier, slower, each rise of his chest shallower than before. The old shepherd dreamed, paws twitching, chasing invisible trails through the dark. And somewhere, in that fragile quiet between heartbeat and silence, the first note of tragedy began to hum. By dawn, the fire in the cabin had gone cold, and the wind outside had sharpened into a scream. Jack stirred in the chair, neck stiff, whiskey glass still half full on the table beside him. A low sound pulled him from sleep, not the wind, but something wet and broken. He turned toward the hearth. Bolt was on the floor, legs splayed, a string of yellow bile dripping from his mouth onto the rug. "Jesus! Bolt!" Jack was on his knees in seconds. The old shepherd's chest heaved, his breath shallow and ragged. Jack grabbed an old towel and wiped his muzzle, whispering, "Easy, buddy, easy." Bolt's eyes flickered toward him, confused, apologetic, then rolled weakly away. His back legs twitched, and when he tried to stand, they folded under him like twigs. Jack's mind scrambled for explanations. Arthritis, maybe. The cold, A bad can of food. Anything but what his gut already knew. He fetched a bowl of water and slid it close. "Drink, pal," he urged, voice shaking. Bolt sniffed it once and turned his head away. By noon, the dog still hadn't moved. Jack sat on the floor beside him, his hand pressed over Bolt's ribs, feeling each shuddering breath. The silence of the cabin was unbearable now. No radio, no wind through the chimney, just the faint hum of dread in his veins. He had seen men die before, but not like this, not helplessly. The moment of denial broke when Bolt let out a soft cry, a sound Jack hadn't heard since the day they pulled Mark Halpern's body from the rubble. He froze, that same cold helplessness gripping him. The truth he'd been refusing to face finally forced its way out. It wasn't age. It wasn't arthritis. It was the anti-freeze. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He looked toward the door, toward the garage, and everything came flooding back. The green puddle, the sweet smell, Bolt licking at the floor while he wasn't looking. His heart slammed against his ribs. He stumbled toward the kitchen counter, fumbling for the magnet card pinned beside the fridge. Gallatin Valley Veterinary Clinic. His hand trembled so badly he dropped the phone twice before managing to punch the numbers. The line rang once before a calm, professional voice answered, "Gallatin Valley Clinic, Dr. Amelia Hayes speaking." Jack swallowed hard. His voice was rough, unsteady. "My dog. He's sick. I think he's been poisoned. Antifreeze. I was working on my truck and—" "Sir," she cut in, brisk but not unkind. "How long ago?" He looked at Bolt, who was lying motionless except for the weak rise of his ribs. "Yesterday evening. Maybe 12 hours. There was a pause, a shift in tone. Urgency replaced calm. "Bring him now. Don't wait. You've got maybe 6 hours before the kidneys fail. Keep him warm and carry him gently. I'll have a table ready." Jack's throat clenched. 6 hours? "Less if he's not hydrated," she said. "Drive safe but fast." The line clicked dead. Jack stared at the silent receiver for half a second before moving. Everything in him switched to survival mode. Automatic, efficient, mechanical. He yanked his army blanket from the bed, wrapped it tight around Bolt's body, then slipped his arms beneath the heavy dog. "Hang on, soldier," he murmured through gritted teeth. Bolt whimpered faintly but didn't resist. His body was limp, terrifyingly light for 90 pounds. Jack carried him out into the blizzard. Snow whipped against his face, biting his skin raw. The sky had turned a dull steel gray, the air thick with flakes that blurred the road beyond the tree line. He opened the passenger door of the old blue pickup, gently setting Bolt on the seat. The dog's head rested against the wool blanket. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, were clouded now, dulled by pain, but still searching for his master. "I've got you," Jack said softly, closing the door and climbing behind the wheel. His hands trembled on the steering wheel as he turned the key. The engine coughed, hesitated, then roared to life. For a moment, Jack leaned forward, eyes closed, forehead resting on his fists. The same words echoed in his mind. 6 hours before the kidneys fail. He slammed the gear shift into drive and pressed the accelerator. The truck lurched down the snow-covered trail, tires sliding but holding. The mountains vanished behind the curtain of white. 30 minutes into the drive, the storm worsened. The world narrowed to the reach of the headlights, which caught only the frantic swirl of snow. Jack leaned forward, shoulders tense, scanning for the next turn in the mountain road. The heater barely worked. His breath fogged the windshield. A low whine came from the passenger seat. Bolt stirred, shivering under the blanket. Jack reached over with one hand, resting it on the dog's head while keeping his eyes on the road. "You stay with me, buddy. We're almost there." He wasn't sure if he was saying it for Bolt or himself. The truck fishtailed once, tires catching ice, but Jack corrected the wheel. His training steadied his hands even as fear gnawed at his gut. This wasn't combat, but it felt worse. There were no medics, no backup, no orders, just him and the one creature who had never left his side. When the road straightened, he glanced again at the dog. Bolt's chest was moving shallowly. His paws twitched, and a soft sound, half growl, half cry, escaped his throat. "Easy, soldier," Jack whispered. "Don't you quit on me now." The clinic lights blurred behind the truck as Jack turned back onto the highway. He could still see Dr. Amelia Hayes's face in his mind, focused, urgent, but honest. She hadn't promised anything. That silence spoke louder than comfort could. Beside him, Bolt lay still, the wool blanket pulled up to his neck. His breathing came in short, thin bursts, and every few seconds Jack reached out to touch his paw, to feel the faint twitch that meant life. The road ahead was little more than white chaos. The blizzard had thickened into a wall. The wipers groaned under the weight of snow, and the headlights illuminated only the storm itself, an endless swirl of white and wind. Jack's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. He had driven through worse in the Navy, under mortar fire and in sandstorms, but this felt harder. The stakes here were simpler, and infinitely crueler. He leaned closer to the dashboard, muttering like he was on a radio again. "Hold on, buddy. You've made it through worse." The heater barely worked. The temperature inside the truck dropped as the storm screamed outside. Through the static of the radio, a faint emergency alert crackled. Power outages, closed roads, and warnings against travel. Jack turned it off. He couldn't afford to hear reasons to stop. His world narrowed to the line of snow-covered asphalt in front of him and the sound of Bolt's shallow breath. Suddenly, a shape appeared through the storm. Taillights. A snowplow ahead was crawling along the highway, clearing a narrow path through the drifts. Relief surged through Jack. He pulled in behind it, following the cleared track, the truck bouncing as tires met hard-packed ice. They drove like that for nearly 15 minutes, a strange convoy of two souls against the elements. But halfway through the pass, the plow began to slow. Its hazard lights blinked, and the driver's silhouette waved him down. Jack eased the truck to a stop. The snowplow driver, a burly man in his 50s, white, red-faced from the cold, with a thick gray beard and orange reflective coat, trudged over. His name patch read Cal Murphy. His eyes were sharp and kind beneath the snow crusting his eyebrows. "Road's blocked ahead," he shouted over the wind. "Tree down. Might take an hour to clear." Jack shook his head. "I don't have an hour. My dog's dying." Cal blinked, glancing at the bundle in the passenger seat. "He's still breathing?" "Barely." Something in Cal's expression softened. "Then we'll make a hole," he said simply. He climbed back into the plow, revved the engine, and angled the blade toward the side of the road. The machine groaned and shoved at the drift, throwing white waves into the air. Jack followed close behind, headlights cutting through the gap the plow carved. After what felt like an eternity, the road opened again. Cal leaned out of his window shouting, "Bozeman's 20 minutes south if you keep the speed steady. Don't stop and stay dead center." Jack gave a short nod. "Thanks." Cal raised a hand. "Give him a fight. Dogs like that. They don't quit easy." Jack pressed the accelerator, truck surging forward into the night. He could still see the snowplow's orange light fading in his mirror, a brief human kindness swallowed by the storm. Inside the cab, Bolt began to stir, his breathing ragged. Jack turned down the heater vent toward him. "You hang in there, soldier." He tried to smile, but his lips trembled. "You remember Kandahar? You dragged me out of that mess. Your turn to let me do the saving." Bolt's paw shifted slightly under the blanket, the faintest of responses. That was enough. The road curved downhill toward the town. In the distance, faint yellow lights flickered through the snow. Bozeman, finally. The clinic was close. Relief welled up, but it was thin and fragile. He couldn't celebrate until Bolt was safe. A sudden flash of movement cut across the headlights, a deer darting through the road. Jack slammed the brakes. The truck skidded sideways, tires shrieking against ice. For one frozen moment, time shattered. Bolt let out a faint yelp as the truck spun, then slammed to a stop in a mound of snow just off the road. Jack's breath came in bursts. He hit the steering wheel once, hard, the sound muffled by gloves. "Come on, not now!" The engine sputtered. He turned the key. Once, twice, and it coughed to life. He exhaled, leaning back. Bolt was trembling, eyes unfocused but still watching him. "Almost there," Jack whispered. "Almost there?" Him, like a physical blow. By the time he pulled into the veterinary clinic's lot, his knuckles were white on the wheel. The small brick building was dim except for a single light glowing above the door. A woman stood waiting, wrapped in a heavy gray parka, her breath clouding in the air. Dr. Amelia Hayes was in her mid-30s, medium height, with sharp, steady features that softened only when she spoke. Her auburn hair was tied back in a messy bun, and tired eyes peeked out from behind fogged glasses. She was one of those people whose calm never felt cold. The kind of calm that could anchor a storm. Years in emergency care had given her that steel. She'd lost her first patient, her own cat, as a veterinary intern, and she'd sworn never to freeze again. She stepped forward as Jack opened the truck door. "You're the one who called about antifreeze?" Jack nodded, his face drawn and pale. "He started vomiting this morning. He can't stand. It's my fault. I didn't." "Not now," she interrupted gently, already moving. "Get him inside. We'll talk later." She held the door open while Jack carried Bolt in, snow trailing behind them. The clinic was warm and bright, the air heavy with antiseptic and faint traces of shampoo. A younger vet tech named Cora Jennings, early 20s with cropped blonde hair and nervous eyes, hurried forward, setting down a gurney. "Set him here," Dr. Hayes said, snapping on gloves. Jack laid Bolt down carefully. The shepherd's breathing was shallow, his paws twitching. Amelia leaned close, lifting a lip, checking the gums. Pale, tacky. Her jaw tightened. "When did he ingest it?" she asked again. "Last night, maybe 12, 13 hours." The room was a blur of motion. Amelia's voice became sharp, precise, giving orders that Jack barely heard. "BP's dropping. Fluids up. Cora, get me the Fompazole, now." Cora sprinted to the cabinet. She was small, with nervous energy that buzzed through her movements, but when the work started, her hands were steady. She'd grown up on a cattle ranch, used to patching wounds with her father during long winters. She'd never seen antifreeze poisoning before, but she followed Amelia's tone like gospel. Jack stood frozen by the wall, eyes wide. Amelia turned briefly to him. "Stay close, but don't touch him yet." He nodded, fists clenched. Every beep from the monitor cut through him like a bullet. Amelia drew the syringe and injected the antidote into the IV line. "We'll slow down the breakdown rate," she murmured, half to herself, half to the machine. "Come on, boy." For minutes that stretched like hours, the only sounds were the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the hiss of the oxygen tank. Amelia's movements were fluid, professional, but there was something else in them. Compassion that wasn't trained, but lived. She'd seen too many people arrive too late. She wasn't letting this one go without a fight. Bolt's body jerked once, weakly. Amelia's eyes snapped to the monitor. Heart rate irregular but present. "He's responding," she said quickly. Jack stepped closer. "What does that mean?" "It means he's still trying," she said. "But his kidneys—" She didn't finish. He swallowed hard. "Then we keep trying." Amelia glanced at him for a heartbeat. The look in her eyes softened. Respect, maybe. "All right," she said quietly. "Help me with the blankets. Keep his body temperature up." They worked together in silence. Amelia adjusted the IV flow while Jack tucked the blankets around Bolt's chest. The shepherd's breathing steadied slightly. Cora wiped frost from the dog's paws and replaced the fluid bag, watching Amelia's movements with silent admiration. Finally, when everything was running, Amelia straightened and pulled off her gloves. "He'll need constant monitoring," she said. If he stabilizes by sunrise, we have a chance." Jack looked down at the dog. Bolt's eyes were half open now, glassy but aware. He moved his head slightly, as if searching for his owner's voice. Jack leaned closer, his words a whisper. "Rest now. You're safe." For the first time since the morning, he felt his own heartbeat. Slow. Amelia glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. Snow still fell softly outside the frosted window, but the howling had stopped. "You can stay in that chair," she said. "Get some rest if you can." Jack sat down beside the table, exhaustion settling over him like the snow outside. He looked at Amelia, the way she moved, quiet and sure, and felt a flicker of gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly. She gave a small smile, barely more than a breath. "Don't thank me yet. Thank him when he wakes up." He looked at Bolt again, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor matching his own pulse. Outside, the storm that had raged all night began to fade, leaving the world white, quiet, and waiting. And somewhere between exhaustion and hope, Jack Mercer closed his eyes, still holding on to the paw of the dog who had once dragged him through fire and who now was fighting his own battle to live. The hours dragged into an endless rhythm of beeping machines and shallow breaths. The clinic's fluorescent light had turned harsh and hollow, bleaching every shadow into something sterile. Jack hadn't moved from his chair beside the steel table. His body ached, his hands numb from gripping Bolt's paw too long. The German shepherd's fur felt cold, not lifeless yet, but drifting close. Jack's eyes were red-rimmed and sunken, the face of a man caught between prayer and surrender. Dr. Amelia Hayes stood near the IV stand, exhaustion pulling at the edges of her composure. Her auburn hair had loosened from its bun, a few strands falling against her cheeks. She was the kind of woman who could hold chaos still just by moving through it, but even she looked shaken now. It had been nearly 4 hours since they started the antidote. The toxin was still winning. Cora, the young vet tech with cropped blonde hair, moved quietly around the room, replacing fluid bags, checking heart rate monitors, trying to avoid the heavy silence between the breaths. She'd seen death before, barn cats, calves, old dogs, but this was different. The air itself felt weighted with memory and love. Amelia glanced at the monitor, heart rate faint, blood pressure sinking. She exhaled slowly. "He's fading." Jack blinked slowly, his throat raw. "How long?" "Not long," she said, her voice gentle but honest. "His kidneys are failing. The sedative will help him go without pain." For a long moment, he said nothing. He just stared at the slow rise and fall of Bolt's chest, the same rhythm that had lulled him through a dozen lonely nights since the war. He'd thought he'd learned how to lose things, comrades, time, parts of himself, but this felt different. This was family. Amelia reached for the syringe. The faint metallic click of the needle cap broke the air. She hesitated for half a second, eyes flicking toward him. "You can say goodbye first." Jack leaned forward, pressing his forehead to Bolt's. "If you have to go," he whispered, voice cracking, "it's okay. I'll be right here." His words hung in the sterile air, trembling with guilt and love. His fingers slid through the shepherd's fur, once thick and proud, now thin and brittle. "You did your duty, soldier. You saved me. You don't owe me another minute." Amelia stepped closer, syringe trembling slightly in her hand. The line of professional detachment she always kept began to blur. She'd lost patience before, but never like this, never with a man holding on as if the world itself depended on one heartbeat. Just as her fingers brushed the IV line, Bolt let out a low, trembling sound, a rattle of air that turned into a weak whine. Both of them froze. Then, with immense effort, the dog lifted his front legs, trembling violently, and pressed them against Jack's chest. His head rested against the man's shoulder, and for one impossibly tender second, the world stopped moving. Amelia's hand fell away. She blinked, staring. "Wait." She leaned closer, pulling her penlight from her pocket. The beam flickered across Bolt's eyes. His pupils are responsive. Cora's head snapped up. What? Amelia's tone shifted instantly, sharp with sudden life. He's still in there. Get me another bag. Fast. Flush the line. Full fluids. Cora scrambled to obey, knocking over a tray in her haste. Jack looked up, hope flooding his face and fear right behind it. What does that mean? It means he's fighting, Amelia said quickly. She adjusted the IV, her hands moving with precision. If we keep his blood moving, we might buy time for his kidneys to recover. Cora returned with the saline bag, hands shaking as she hooked it in. Do you want another dose of fomepizole? Amelia shook her head. No, not yet. Too much and his liver shuts down. We stabilize first. She looked at Jack. Hold his head steady. Keep him breathing evenly if you can. Jack slid his arms beneath Bolt's neck, supporting the heavy, trembling skull. The shepherd's breath rasped against his sleeve, uneven but still coming. Easy, Jack murmured. You're not done yet. Amelia pushed a fresh line of fluids through the port. Come on, boy. Come on. Minutes stretched. Then the faint blip on the monitor rose, just barely, from a flat near silence to a thin but steady beat. Amelia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. There. That's it. Cora's voice was barely a whisper. He's stabilizing. Jack closed his eyes, his shoulders shaking once. Thank you. But Amelia didn't look up. Her focus was absolute. Don't thank me. Thank him. Most animals would have given up hours ago. The storm outside had quieted to a soft fall of snow. The windows glowed faintly gold from the parking lot lights, and the silence that filled the clinic was no longer dread. It was fragile hope. Cora slipped out quietly to refill the heater fuel, leaving the room to its 3 occupants. Amelia turned to Jack. He's not out of danger. He'll need dialysis, manual filtration until we can confirm function. Can you help me? Jack nodded instantly. Tell me what to do. For the next hour they worked side by side, moving in quiet rhythm. Amelia explained the process, circulating the fluids, monitoring the pressure, keeping the body temperature stable. Jack followed every instruction, his movements slow but deliberate. At one point, as he steadied the filtration tube, he spoke softly. You ever get used to it? Amelia looked up. Losing them? He nodded. She hesitated, then shook her head. No. You just learn how to stay standing while it happens. Jack studied her face for a moment. The calm, the fatigue, the quiet strength behind her tone. She wasn't a soldier, but she carried the same scars. The hours blurred into one long vigil. The IV dripped in rhythm with the beeping monitor, like the pulse of a shared heartbeat. Bolt's breathing grew less ragged, though still heavy. His paw twitched occasionally, the muscle memory of dreams that never really ended. Near dawn, Cora returned with a thermos of coffee and handed it to Jack. You should drink something, she said softly. He took it, murmuring thanks. The warmth hit his palms like mercy. You two don't sleep much, do you? Amelia smiled faintly. Not when something's still breathing. Jack looked down at Bolt again. Then none of us are sleeping tonight. For a moment they all stood in silence. 3 strangers bound by a single life clinging to the edge of survival. Then, softly, Amelia said, We'll know by morning. If he's still improving, there's a real chance. Jack nodded, staring at the slow rise of Bolt's chest. He's a fighter, Amelia's voice gentled. So are you. Jack didn't respond, but a small smile crossed his tired face. His hand never left Bolt's fur. As the first hint of dawn crept through the frost on the window, Amelia adjusted the last IV bag. The blip on the heart monitor remained steady. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had turned. The first light of Christmas crept through the frosted window pane, a soft golden shimmer over the cold steel table. The world outside was silent, as though even the snow dared not disturb the moment. Inside the small clinic, time had stopped somewhere between exhaustion and prayer. Jack Mercer had fallen asleep sitting up, his hand still resting over Bolt's paw. His chin rested against his chest, eyes sunken from nights without sleep. The faint beeping of the heart monitor pulsed steadily beside him, no longer the fragile sound of desperation, but the rhythm of something holding on. Dr. Amelia Hayes stood in the corner, leaning against a counter, coffee cup in one hand, clipboard in the other. She hadn't gone home in 30 hours. The soft auburn strands that framed her face glowed in the morning light, and though her eyes were tired, they carried a quiet triumph, the kind you only earn when you fight against something impossible and win, even if just for a little while. Cora Jennings moved gently through the room, checking the monitors. She'd lost count of how many times she had adjusted the IV or changed the blanket, but this morning her movements had a kind of peace to them. When she glanced at the dog, her lips curved into a tiny smile. "He's breathing steady," she whispered. Amelia nodded softly, keeping her voice low. "Let him rest. He's done enough fighting for one lifetime." The German shepherd lay stretched beneath the blanket, his black and tan coat brushed and clean, his chest rising slow but sure. He was 12 years old, but in that moment he looked ageless, a creature carved from loyalty and endurance. Jack stirred awake, rubbing at his eyes. It took him a second to remember where he was. Then his gaze fell on Bolt, and froze. The dog's eyes were open, faintly glassy but alive, focused on him. "Hey," Jack breathed, his voice breaking. "Hey, you." Bolt's tail gave one weak thump against the sheet, just once, but enough. Jack blinked hard, tears blurring his vision. He reached forward, cupping the dog's face gently in both hands. "You stood watch till the end, didn't you?" Bolt's breath hitched, a sound halfway between a sigh and a small bark. His nose twitched as if recognizing his master's scent. For Jack, it was everything. Amelia approached quietly, stethoscope in hand. She pressed it against the shepherd's chest, listening. A small, astonished smile tugged at her lips. "He's a fighter, Jack," she said softly. "You made it in time." Cora sniffed quietly behind her, pretending to be busy with the monitor. Jack didn't notice. He was still kneeling beside the table, forehead resting on Bolt's neck, whispering thanks that blurred into tears. The clinic stayed hushed for a long while after that. Outside, snow began to glitter as the first sunlight touched it. The storm had passed, leaving the world clean, bright, and impossibly new, like grace. Itself had brushed over the valley. A week later, the snow started to melt. The river near Jack's cabin flowed again, cutting a silver path through the pines. The mountains were still white, but their sharp edges softened under the sun. Life, in its quiet way, had returned. Bolt moved slower now, each step careful but proud. The fur on his back gleamed under the light. His eyes, still a little cloudy, held the same spark that had seen Jack through war and loneliness alike. He had scars, visible and hidden, but he carried them the way old soldiers do, as proof of survival. Jack worked outside the cabin that afternoon, fixing the last of the damage from the storm. His hands were raw from cold, but there was a contentment in his movements. He had something to build for again. From the porch, Amelia watched with quiet amusement. She had stopped by on her day off to check on Bolt, and maybe, just maybe, to see how the man who never smiled was doing. She wore a cream-colored coat over her scrubs, her hair tied back in a simple braid. There was something softer about her now, as if the exhaustion of that night had melted into quiet gratitude. "How's his appetite?" she called out. Jack straightened, brushing sawdust off his flannel shirt. "Better than mine. He steals half my breakfast." Amelia smiled. "That's the best diagnosis I've heard all week." Bolt, lying near the porch steps, lifted his head at the sound of her voice. He let out a slow, contented huff, tail wagging once before his eyes drifted half-closed again. Jack chuckled. "You hear that? Doctor says you're cleared for mischief." She laughed, the kind of laugh that carried warmth, the kind Jack hadn't heard in a long time. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly, reflecting off the new sign Jack had nailed above the garage door. No more antifreeze. Ever. It wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. A small vow to the friend who had nearly died because of one careless mistake. Later that evening, as Amelia packed her bag to leave, Jack stopped her at the door. He handed her something small wrapped in cloth. "For you," he said quietly. She unwrapped it, a piece of metal, shaped like a dog tag. The inscription read, "For every soldier who came home, and the one who never left his post." Her eyes softened. "Jack." He shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Just thought you should have one too. You're part of the reason he's still breathing." Amelia smiled faintly, tucking it into her pocket. "You know," she said, "most people would have given up that night." Jack looked down at Bolt, who had fallen asleep by the fire. Most people never owed their life to something that couldn't speak. Amelia studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Take care of him, Jack." "I intend to." When she drove away, the sun dipped low behind the ridge. Jack stepped back. Inside, warmth flooding through him as he watched Bolt sleeping beside the hearth, the gentle glow of the fire painting his fur in gold. For the first time in years, Jack felt peace, not the fragile kind born from silence, but the deep, rooted kind that comes when a soul finally lays its burdens down. He reached down and rested a hand on Bolt's shoulder. "You rest now, soldier," he whispered. "We made it home." Outside, snowflakes began to fall again, soft, quiet, and fleeting, like the last blessing of winter before spring. Miracles don't always arrive in thunder or light. Sometimes they come in the quiet breath of a creature you thought you'd lost. That Christmas morning wasn't just about survival. It was about grace, the kind that reminds us God's mercy can reach even the coldest corners of our hearts. In our everyday lives, we often rush past blessings too small to notice. A loyal friend, a second chance, a moment of warmth when we least deserve it. But perhaps that's where faith truly lives, in the soft places where love refuses to give up. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Leave a comment, tell someone you care about them, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope, love, and faith. May God bless everyone watching this, and may every soul who believes in miracles type Amen in the comments below.